I walk into the courtroom, and the air is thick with something I've smelled 1,000 times before. It's a specific heavy scent, desperation mixed with a healthy, nauseating dose of arrogance. This isn't just a legal proceeding, it's narrative authority in its rawest form. I've been sitting on this bench long enough to know that the more expensive the suit, the thinner the empathy usually is. Today, the spotlight features a man named Mr. Sterling. He's a millionaire contractor who clearly thinks he's made of gold, while everyone else is just the dirt he walks on to get to his yacht. Sterling is sitting there with a smug little smirk plastered on his face, looking like he just stepped off a private jet. He's leaning back, radiating a sense of untouchable wealth. Across from him, hunched over and looking half broken, is the plaintiff, David Miller. David looks like he's been through the ringer, both literally and figuratively. His arm is bound in a grimy sling, his posture is defensive, and his eyes carry a weariness that all the money in Sterling's bank account couldn't buy. I settle into my chair, the weight of the robe feeling heavier than usual today. You didn't just walk into a real trial. You walked into a performance of justice that reality rarely provides. Fast, certain, and emotionally satisfying. I pick up my pen, tapping it against the bench, a sound that usually silences a room, but Sterling just adjusts his gold watch. Mr. Sterling, I begin, my voice cutting through the hushed room like a cold scalpel. You're a millionaire contractor, I'm told. Building empires, are we? He leans forward, that smirk widening into a grin that doesn't reach his eyes. That's correct, Your Honor. I build quality. I employ good people. I run a business based on results. Good people, I repeat, my eyebrows inching up toward my hairline. I glance at David Miller, whose jaw is tight enough to snap. And Mr. Miller here, he was one of your good people, wasn't he? Or was he just a number on a spreadsheet? Sterling waves a dismissive hand, the kind of gesture people use when they're talking about a minor inconvenience. He was an employee, Your Honor, an independent contractor technically. We had a contract. Ah, a contract, I say, leaning forward, my gaze locking onto his like a heat-seeking missile. The magical piece of paper that people like you think absolves them of all human responsibility the moment someone gets hurt on your watch, right? The room goes silent. It's a deafening kind of silence. Sterling's smirk wavers for a millisecond, a tiny crack in the armor, but he recovers quickly. He doesn't know it yet, but that was his first big mistake. He thinks this is a game of technicalities. He doesn't realize that in my court, I don't just enforce the law, I perform it, and the performance has just begun. I look at David, then back at Sterling. The contrast is sickening. One man is fighting to keep his house after medical bills swallowed his savings. The other is fighting to keep his ego intact. Don't insult my intelligence, Sterling, I say, my voice dropping to a dangerous low. I've seen more contracts than you've seen construction sites. Let's talk about what really happened on that roof. Sterling sits there, adjusting his silk tie as if he's at a corporate gala rather than a court of law. He radiates the kind of entitlement that comes from never having been told no by anyone with a bank account smaller than his. I look at him and I see a man who has forgotten the weight of a hammer and the sting of a hard day's sweat. To him, David Miller isn't a human being with a family. He's a line item on a budget, a resource that can be discarded when it breaks. Mr. Sterling, I say, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble. You mentioned a contract. You mentioned independent status. You seem very concerned with the paperwork, but I'm concerned with the pavement. Specifically, the pavement Mr. Miller hit when your unsecured scaffolding gave way. Sterling chuckles, a dry, raspy sound that sets my teeth on edge. Your Honor, let's be realistic. Roofing is inherently dangerous. He's a professional. A professional knows how to balance. If he fell, it's because he wasn't paying attention. I can't be held responsible for every clumsy misstep an employee takes on a job site. I lean back, letting the silence stretch. In my courtroom, silence is a weapon. It forces people like Sterling to talk, to fill the void with their own arrogance. And Sterling doesn't disappoint. He looks at David with a sneer that would make a saint lose their patience. Clumsy, I repeat the word, tasting the bitterness of it. That's a very convenient word, Mr. Sterling. It shifts the blame from the equipment you provided to the man you hired. Tell me, Mr. Miller, what happened the moment that scaffolding failed? David clears his throat. His voice is raspy, fueled by months of pain and the sheer frustration of being ignored. I told him, Your Honor. I told him the right side felt loose. Sterling told me to quit complaining and get the job done, or he'd find someone else who wanted the paycheck. I took one step, just one, and the world disappeared under my feet. I fell 15 feet. I heard my arm snap before I even felt the pain. I turned my gaze back to Sterling. He's looking at his gold watch, visibly bored. And then what, Mr. Sterling? Did you call an ambulance? Did you offer first aid? David scoffs, a sound of pure disbelief. He didn't call anyone, Your Honor. He stood over me while I was gasping for air and told me I was going to pay for the ladder I bent when I fell. He said I ruined his equipment. The courtroom gasps. I feel a heat rising in my chest, not just anger, but a profound sense of judicial duty to crush this kind of cold-blooded greed. Let me get this straight, I say, leaning so far forward that Sterling finally has to look me in the eye. You stood over a man with a shattered limb, a man who fell on your property, using your equipment, and your first thought was the replacement cost of a piece of aluminum. You threatened to sue an injured worker for a bent ladder. Sterling shrugs, his arrogance still brittle but holding. It was an expensive ladder, Your Honor, and he was being careless. I pick up my pen and write one word in bold letters on the top of the file: negligence. You're worried about a ladder, Sterling, I mutter, while I'm worried about your soul. Because right now, from where I'm sitting, your bank account is full, but your humanity is completely bankrupt. I look down at the folder on my desk, flipping through the pages with a deliberate, agonizing slowness. I can feel Sterling's eyes on me, probably trying to guess if I've found the holes in his story. In this courtroom, I've seen every trick in the book. Contractors like Sterling love to hide behind a paper shield, thick stacks of contracts and waivers designed to make them untouchable while they cut corners on the job site. But papers don't bleed. Men like David Miller do. Mr. Sterling, I say, not looking up from the file, you claim in your statement that you provide state-of-the-art safety equipment. You claim that Mr. Miller chose not to use it. That's a very bold statement. It implies that David here has a death wish. Does he look like a man who wanted to fall 15 feet onto concrete? Sterling clears his throat, shifting in his expensive leather chair. Your Honor, we have harnesses in the truck. We have safety protocols. If he didn't clip in, that's on him. I can't be everywhere at once. I'm running a multi-million-dollar operation, not a daycare. I finally look up, my eyes locking onto his. A daycare? Is that what you call ensuring your workers don't end up in a wheelchair? Mr. Miller, let's talk about these harnesses in the truck. On the day you fell, was there a safety harness available for you to use on that roof? David shakes his head, a bitter smile touching his lips. The harness is in the truck, Your Honor. The truck was locked. Sterling kept the keys because he didn't want us wasting time setting up ropes for a simple roofing job. He told us if we weren't on the shingles in 10 minutes, we were fired. He said, and I quote, "Gravity is only a problem for the weak." The silence that follows is like a physical weight. I turn back to Sterling, whose face is starting to lose that healthy, tanned glow. Gravity is only a problem for the weak? That's an interesting management philosophy, Sterling. Tell me, does that philosophy apply to you when you're sitting in your office, or just to the men who are actually building your empire? Sterling splutters, his hands gesturing wildly. He's exaggerating. He's twisting my words to get a bigger payout. I'm a professional. I've won awards for my construction projects. You build buildings, Sterling, but you can't build a defense against the truth, I snap, bringing my hand down on the desk with a sharp crack. Awards don't secure scaffolding. Integrity does. I have a report here from an independent inspector who visited the site an hour after the fall. Do you know what they found? They found that the scaffolding wasn't just loose. It was missing the locking pins, pins that cost about $5 a piece. You risked a man's life to save $20 and 10 minutes of labor. I lean back, watching him sweat. The expensive suit now looks like it's suffocating him. This is the moment where the millionaire contractor starts to realize that in my court, his net worth is zero if his word is worthless. You think this is funny, Sterling? You think laughing at an injured worker is a good business strategy? I ask, my voice a whisper that carries more weight than a shout. Well, let's see how much you're laughing when we start looking at the real cost of your efficiency. I pick up a stack of medical invoices from the folder. They are crisp, white, and heartless, just rows of numbers and codes. But as I look at David Miller, I don't see numbers. I see a man whose life has been reduced to a debt ledger because of someone else's greed. In this courtroom, people like Sterling think in margins and percentages, but I think in rent payments and grocery bills. Mr. Miller, I say, my voice softening as I address the man in the sling. Let's look at the reality of your situation. You've submitted invoices totaling $15,000 in medical expenses, surgery, cast, 6 months of grueling physical therapy. Is that correct? David nods, his eyes downcast. Yes, Your Honor, and that's just the bills I've received. There are more coming. I've had to borrow from my brother just to keep the lights on. My credit is ruined. I spent 20 years building a reputation as a reliable roofer, and now I'm a man who can't even lift a gallon of milk without wincing. I turn the page. And $20,000 in lost wages, because a roofer with one arm isn't a roofer at all. That's $35,000 of tangible, verifiable loss. $35,000 that vanished from your life the moment you hit that concrete. I look at Sterling. He's leaning back again, a faint, condescending smile playing on his lips. It's the look of a man who spends $35,000 on a weekend in Vegas and doesn't blink. 35 grand? Sterling scoffs, loud enough for the back row to hear. For a broken arm, Your Honor? That's a nice car in some neighborhoods. He's milking it. He's taking a minor workplace accident and trying to turn it into a retirement plan. It was a clean break. He should have been back on the ladder in 6 weeks. The smirk on his face is like a physical slap to the face of justice. I feel the silence in the room tighten. Everyone is waiting for me to react. I don't give him a shout. I give him a stare that could freeze the sun. A retirement plan, Sterling? I ask, my voice vibrating with a quiet, lethal intensity. You think having a steel plate bolted to your radius is a vacation? You think David Miller enjoys sitting in a waiting room 3 times a week while his kids wonder why Dad can't play catch with them? You see a clean break. I see a shattered livelihood. I stand up, pacing the small area behind my bench. You mentioned your quality business practices earlier. Tell me, in your world of high-end construction, does quality include leaving your workers to rot when your equipment fails? You bragged about your wealth, about your successful empire, but success isn't measured in the height of your buildings, Sterling. It's measured in the integrity of your foundations. And right now, your foundations are crumbling into dust. Sterling's lawyer whispers something in his ear, probably telling him to shut up, but Sterling brushes him off. He still thinks he's the smartest person in the room. He still thinks money is a magic wand that can erase human suffering. Money doesn't buy you immunity from common sense, Sterling, I say, leaning over the bench until I'm just feet away from him. And it certainly doesn't buy you a pass on basic human responsibility. You're not just a contractor, you're an employer. And when you put someone in harm's way because you were too cheap to buy a $5 locking pin, you pay the price. And believe me, the price is about to go up. I pick up the file, closing it with a decisive snap that echoes like a gunshot in the silent courtroom. The silence is deafening now. Sterling is no longer smirking. The arrogance hasn't completely left his face, but it's been replaced by a pale, clammy layer of discomfort. Good. He should be uncomfortable. In my courtroom, you don't get to hide behind a luxury suit when your hands are dirty from negligence. Mr. Sterling, I say, my voice calm but with an undercurrent of steel. You may build skyscrapers, you may build empires, but you have failed to build the one thing that actually matters in a civilized society, a foundation of basic human decency. You've sat there and tried to convince me that David Miller is a clumsy, independent contractor. You've tried to shield yourself with paperwork and legal technicalities. I lean back, looking him straight in the eyes. But you can't build a defense against the truth, and the truth is, you provided the site. You provided the faulty equipment. You provided the direction for the work. And when that work resulted in a shattered limb, you didn't provide a single ounce of compassion. Instead, you provided a threat to sue for a bent ladder. Sterling opens his mouth to protest, but I hold up a single hand. Don't. Save your breath. Your protests are as hollow as your commitment to safety. You treated David Miller like he was a piece of disposable equipment, something to be used until it broke and then tossed onto the scrap heap. Well, today, Mr. Sterling, that disposable cog is fighting back, and I am going to ensure that the machine pays for the damage it caused. I turn my gaze toward the audience, but my words are aimed directly at the man in the expensive tie. Success is often measured in dollars in your world, Sterling. But in this courtroom, success is measured in integrity. It's measured in the way you treat the people who actually put the shingles on the roof and the food on your table. By those measures, you are a spectacular, miserable failure. Sterling finally looks genuinely unnerved. The dawning realization is hitting him. He's not just in a mild inconvenience. He's in a situation where his wealth won't shield him from the consequences of his actions. He thought he could laugh this off. He thought he could buy his way out of responsibility. You see, Sterling, I continue, the words dripping with a justice he clearly didn't anticipate. Money doesn't buy you immunity from common sense. It makes you more accountable because you had the resources to do the right thing, and you chose the cheap path instead. You gambled with a man's life to save a few dollars, and you lost. Now it's time to pay the house. I pick up my pen, ready to calculate the final judgment. Mr. Miller's medical bills and lost wages come to $35,000. That is the floor, Sterling. That is just the beginning. Now, let's talk about the ceiling, the part where we account for your appalling lack of remorse and the sheer arrogance you've displayed in this room today. I reach for the final page of my notes. The ink looks darker under the harsh courtroom lights, or maybe it's just the gravity of what I'm about to do. I can see Sterling out of the corner of my eye. He's trying to regain some semblance of composure, straightening his $1,000 tie, attempting to project an air of control he clearly no longer possesses. He's still waiting for the punchline to a joke only he finds funny. Well, the punchline is here, Sterling, and it's going to hit your bank account like a wrecking ball. Let's talk about the amount, I say, my voice taking on that familiar final tone that signals the end of the games. We've established the facts. Mr. Miller's medical bills are $15,000. His lost wages, calculated by his inability to perform the high-intensity labor you demanded, are $20,000. That brings us to a tangible, verifiable loss of $35,000. I pause, letting that number hang in the air. Sterling nods slightly, as if he's already written the check in his head and is ready to walk out the door. He thinks he's getting off easy. He thinks 35 grand is just the cost of doing business. But, I continue, my voice dropping an octave, we are not merely here to settle a tab. We are here to address a conduct that is, frankly, morally reprehensible. Mr. Sterling, you didn't just fail to secure a scaffold. You failed to secure your humanity. You mocked an injured man. You threatened to sue him for a ladder while he was bleeding on your job site. You showed a callous disregard for the very people who built your wealth. I lean forward, and for the first time, Sterling meets my gaze without that condescending smirk. He looks like a little boy who realized the game is over and he's lost everything. In light of your egregious behavior, your lack of remorse, and your blatant attempt to exploit the legal system to avoid responsibility, I am adding a substantial amount for punitive damages. You need to learn that in my courtroom and in this country, people are not disposable cogs in your profit machine. Actions have consequences. I pick up my pen and write the final figure with a heavy hand. In addition to the $35,000 in actual damages, I am awarding David Miller $40,000 for pain, suffering, and emotional distress. This brings the total award to $75,000. The gasp in the room is audible. Sterling's jaw drops. The sheer disbelief on his face is the most honest thing I've seen from him all day. He's not used to being told no, and he's certainly not used to paying $75,000 for a clumsy misstep. You think this is funny, Sterling? I ask, my eyes piercing through him. You think laughing at a worker is a good strategy? Well, prepare to laugh all the way to the bank to make a very substantial withdrawal, because I am making you pay, and I am making you pay dearly. The sound of the gavel hitting the wood wasn't just a signal that the case was over, it was the sound of a luxury world crashing down. I sit back, watching the color drain from Mr. Sterling's face. The expensive suit that seemed to radiate power 10 minutes ago now looks like it's 3 sizes too big for him. He looks like a man who just realized that his money isn't a magic wand that can erase the consequences of his own cold-heartedness. He thought he was untouchable. He was wrong. So very, very wrong. Sterling is whispering frantically to his lawyer, a man who now looks like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. They're probably calculating the damage, not just the $75,000, but the hit to Sterling's reputation. In his world, reputation is currency, and today his currency just plummeted to zero. He's trying to regain some semblance of control, straightening his tie, but his hands are shaking. Mr. Sterling, I say, my voice cutting through their frantic whispering. He snaps his head up, startled. You thought you could get away with this. You thought a quick dismissal and a condescending laugh would make David Miller's pain disappear. You believed your status gave you a pass on basic human empathy. Well, let me tell you something. The world doesn't work that way. Not in my courtroom anyway. I walk a few steps closer to the edge of the bench, my gaze unwavering. You hired Mr. Miller, you directed his work, you provided the site, and you failed miserably to ensure his safety. That's not a complex legal argument, that's common sense. You gambled with a man's well-being because you were too arrogant to listen to his warnings about that scaffolding. You lost that gamble. Now you pay the debt. Sterling looks down, finally unable to meet my eyes. The arrogance is shattered. In its place is a sobering, heavy reality. This isn't about punishing you for being wealthy, Sterling, I continue, my tone softening just a fraction, though the steel remains. It's about accountability. It's about ensuring that people like Mr. Miller, who work hard and get injured through no fault of their own, aren't left to suffer in silence while people like you hide behind a checkbook. Your wealth doesn't make you exempt from the rules of humanity. It makes you more responsible for following them, and you failed that test. I turn my attention to David Miller. He's no longer hunched over. There's a flicker of hope in his eyes, a stark contrast to the despair I saw when he first walked in. He looks lighter, unburdened by the weight of bills he couldn't pay and a voice that wasn't being heard. I give him a small, reassuring nod. Mr. Miller, you acted in good faith. You trusted your employer. That trust was betrayed, but today that betrayal has a price. I hope this judgment allows you to focus on your recovery and rebuild your life. You've earned that right. I stand up, my robes heavy with the weight of the decision, signifying the end of the proceedings. The case of Miller versus Sterling is closed. Justice, in my estimation, has been served. Sterling remains frozen in his seat, his face a mask of shock and perhaps a grudging understanding that he just got schooled. He thought he was above the law, above accountability. He was wrong. This isn't a game. It's about people's lives and livelihoods. And when people like Sterling try to exploit others, they eventually face the consequences. They face the truth. They face me. I watch him for a moment longer before I step away from the bench. He's still sitting there, looking like he's just been punched in the gut. The smugness is gone, replaced by a pale, clammy fear. Good. Let him feel the heat. Let him understand that his money isn't a magic wand that can erase human suffering. He built his empire on the backs of people like David Miller, and now he's going to have to pay to fix what his negligence broke. It's not just about the $75,000, it's the reputation damage and the public reminder that even millionaires are bound by the same moral laws as everyone else. Mr. Sterling, I say, my voice carrying clearly across the now quieter room. He snaps his head up, startled. You thought you could just dismiss a man's injury with a wave of your hand and a threat. Well, the world doesn't work that way. Not in my courtroom, anyway. I walk a few steps closer to the exit, my gaze unwavering. You gambled with someone else's well-being, and you lost. Now you pay. And I hope this experience teaches you a valuable lesson about integrity because, frankly, your current attitude suggests you're in dire need of one. I turn my gaze to David Miller one last time. He is smiling. He looks lighter, unburdened by the despair I saw when he first walked in. He acts as a reminder of why I wear this robe. Justice might be slow sometimes, but it is relentless. I gather my papers with a sense of quiet satisfaction. As I exit the courtroom, I cast one last look at Sterling. He's still staring at the floor, the weight of the judgment finally bearing down on him. He thought he was untouchable. He was mistaken. In my courtroom, everyone is accountable, and watching arrogance crumble under the weight of undeniable truth is the most satisfying part of my job.